Alright, good afternoon guys. So you're going to have to bear with me today because I do not have my typical pen that I use to be able to write in this program. So I'm going to have to actually try to write with my mouse, which is not too easy to do. So you're going to have to bear with me as I'm doing this. I'll do my best to make it as neat as possible. And you'll be able to hear my explanations, so that should help out a lot as far as that goes. So we're going to be covering graphing linear equations. We did that worksheet on Friday that was just solving linear equations and solving linear inequalities. So this week we're going to be covering graphing linear equations. We're going to graph some equations just using t-charts and all that kind of stuff today. And then tomorrow we'll be working on, on Tuesday night we'll be working on finding the equation of a line, using x and y intercepts and all that kind of stuff. So, so just real quick, we're going to go over a couple things here. You have the slope-intercept form, which is probably the easiest way to be able to actually graph. Is y equals mx plus b, and in that you have m is equal to the slope, if I can type correctly, and you have b is equivalent to the y-intercept. I'm hoping that slope and the intercepts are review for you guys. Just in case you forgot, the y-intercept is the point where the graph crosses the y-axis. Alright, so we're going to start with a basic equation, just y equals 2x plus 1. As you can tell, this is actually already in slope-intercept form. You have the m is equal to 2, and I apologize because I'm trying to write with a mouse. I'm going to probably talk a little slower at points. And you have that the y-intercept is at 1. Okay, so I know when I do my x and y-intercept, that the y value is 1, which gives my x value to be at 0. And I'm also going to go ahead and put in my coordinate plane, which something I want you guys to get used to is you don't always have to have your coordinate plane, your x and your y axis. You don't always have to have those right in the center. You kind of want to base it on what your graph's going to look like and where the majority of your values are going to be. So here's my x and my y axis, and I know that where y is 1, let me actually change this to black, where y is 1, x is going to be 0 here, which tells me that there will be a point at x equals 0 and y equals 1, which is right here. Okay, so that's my y-intercept. And I also know that my slope is going to be 2, and if you guys remember, slope is always y over x. Okay, and so I need to turn this into a fraction, so I'm going to do 2 over 1. Now, you can do a couple different things here. You can use the slope to graph, or you can actually use the slope to graph, or you can just plug in other points for x and solve for the values of y. So if I'm going to use a slope, we're going to do 1 point using the slope. I'm going to go positive 2. I'll start here. I'll go positive 2 on the x, or excuse me, on the y. So I'm going to add 2 to 1, which gives me 3. And I'm going to add 1 to the x, which would be 1, which gives me my next point of 1 up 3, which would be right there. Okay? Now let's go ahead and let's just, I'll show you the other way of doing this. Not doing this using the slope. So I'm just going to pick the number -1. And I'm going to plug -1 in for x. So I get y equals 2 times negative 1 plus 1. And if I simplify this, that's going to give me y equals 2 times negative 1 is negative 2 plus 1 is negative 1. Alright, and I'll go ahead and plot that one. So we're over negative 1 down negative 1, which is right about there. And then let's go ahead and use the slope again. So let's use, I'm actually going to take this last point we just used, and we're going to actually, we're going to find another point down here. So if I use this point here and I go up to right 1, that's going to put me here. So if I want to find the next point down here, because you guys can tell this is going to be a line, I'm going to have more points down here. I'm going to start here and I'm going to work backwards. So instead of going up 2, I'm going to go down 2. Instead of going right 1, I will go left 1, which will put me at a point right about there. Okay? Now we can go ahead and graph our line. And I'll actually write that number in first, which is over negative 2. And that's down 1, 2, that's down negative 3. Okay? And so let's go ahead and graph the line. Because remember, these aren't just points. This is actually an equation for a line. So now we have to graph our line. And when you guys graph your lines, I am fully expecting you to use a, I want you to be using a ruler to do these, okay? Put the arrows on your graph, because this doesn't just stop at the bottom of the graph. This continues forever. Now the last thing I want, and I apologize, this is going to be really sloppy, I want you to actually label these points. So this is 1, 3. This one is 0, 1. Okay, this one is negative 1 and negative 1. And this one was negative 2 and negative 3. And so now I have my graph for my equation. I showed you a couple different ways of doing it using the slope. We also just picked points in and found values. So that's the basics for this, okay? Now, when we get to example number 2, we have an equation that is not in the correct order. It's not in slope-intercept form. So I need to get it into slope-intercept form, because graphing it this way is going to be a lot more difficult. I'd actually have to find all the values, okay? So the first thing I want to do is I want to get it in slope-intercept form, which, if we remember right from what I showed you just a few minutes ago, slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. So I need to solve for y. So we're going to use our addition properties, and this is going to be the addition property of equality. All right, and that will give me 3y. So as long as I add whatever I add to one side, I have to add to both, which is going to be the addition property of equality. And now I also use my addition, the additive inverse property, which tells me that negative 6 plus 6 is 0. Okay. And that equals 2x plus 6. Okay. And I know that adding 0 to anything, is 0 is the additive identity, which tells me that 3y plus 0 is just 3y. So I'm going to just go ahead and ignore the 0 now, and I'm going to use my my multiplication property of equality, and I'm going to divide everything by 3. And now I get y equals, and again, this is going to be the multiplicative inverse. So it tells me 3 divided by 3 is going to be 1. And now I've got 2/3 x plus, and 6 divided by 3 is going to be 2. Alright, so now let's go ahead and use the same techniques we just used a minute ago. So let me get my x and y axis on here. So here's my y axis. I'm going to put these in the middle still because we're graphing lines. It's pretty much going to be even where all the positives and the negatives and stuff are. So the very first one I'm going to do again, alright, my slope this time is 2/3, and b is 2. So I'm going to graph 2, and my x is 0 because that's my y-intercept. So we're going to go 0 up 2, which is right here. That is a terrible point, so actually let me redo that. Right there. Okay. And then we're going to also, let's go ahead and I'm going to use the slope for one. So this time, again, the slope is y over x, so that's 2 over 3. So I'm going to go up 2, and I'm going to go right 3. 1, 2, 3, which puts me right there. So let me go ahead and put my point in. Okay, we got the next point. Alright, so that was one of them, so let's go ahead and write that one down. So that's a 1, 2, 3, and up 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the point 3, 4. Now let's go ahead for this one, and let's do something a little bit different. So this time we're going to pick a number. But when we pick a number, if I pick the number 1, I'm going to end up with a fraction, because 2/3 times 1 is 2/3. Plus 2, that means I'm going to have to add a fraction and a whole number, which is going to give me a fraction. So whenever you end up with a fraction with your x, I want to pick my numbers wisely. I want to pick numbers that are multiples of the denominator. So I would want to pick a number like 3, which we did here, or I'd want to pick a number like 6. So let's go ahead and pick the number 6 so that I can show you what I'm talking about. So if I do 6 and we plug it in, we get y equals 2/3 times 6 plus 2, and I apologize, this is really hard to write with the mouse. 2/3 times 6, well 3 and 6 are going to cancel, and I'm left with a 2 here. So this is going to give me y equals 2 times 2 is 4 plus 2. Okay. And that means that I'm going to get y equals 6. Alright? But you notice I didn't end up with a fraction here. And you know, whenever you're graphing, you always want to try to graph not using fractions if possible, because sometimes graphing the fractions can be fairly difficult, and it's not as neat either for that matter. So let's go ahead and graph 6, 6. So that was 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That gives me my point. And let's go ahead and use the slope again to find another point down here. So I'm going to go down 2, 1, 2, and right 3, 1, 2, 3, which puts me right here. 1, 2, 3, right there. And that's actually going to be the point negative 3 and 0. Let's go ahead and connect our lines now. And again, we need to label the points. Don't forget your arrowheads. Alright, so this was 6, 6. This one was 3 and 4. This one was 0 and 2. And this one was negative 3 and 0. Alright, so now I got all my points labeled, I got my graph done, and that's all it is to it. Okay, so the worksheet tomorrow is going to be based on this. Be prepared to, the worksheet on Tuesday is going to be based on this. Be prepared to work on this, and we're going to go from there. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I again apologize for the sloppy writing. I'm going to try to work something out so it'll be a little neater from now on. Alright, have a great weekend.